Hey folks, welcome back to Indaba Africa once again. Welcome back to Chris White Africa, Indaba Africa, excuse me. still coming in from my exercising there, out getting a bit of a run in. Welcome to Chris White Africa on the Indaba Africa channel right here on YouTube on a 1st of December. My goodness, folks, where has 2020 gone? It has come and gone. It is the end of the year. And you may have noticed behind me, the scenery looks a little bit different. I've taken down my Africa theme that we normally have there in the back, which gets periodically changed with little Easter eggs for everybody to find. And I've put up a Christmas winter theme, so you can see that behind me there. Anyway, folks, welcome to the stream today. My guest today, I'll introduce in just a moment, is a special feature guest. Really looking forward to this conversation. We've known each other for a number of years now, worked together at US Africa Command. She's quite an interesting person and very talented at what she does. And we're going to talk about Africa today, just a conversation, talk about what's going on in Africa, maybe a bit about her experiences, because she's lived in a few different countries that I didn't live in Africa. So that should be interesting in itself. All right, folks, with that, let me go ahead and welcome in my guest. My guest today is Dr. Liza Briggs. Liza, how are you today? Welcome to the channel.
Hi, how are you, Chris?
Older.
And wiser.
Well, I hope so. You know, I'm kind of looking like Santa Claus here, which is people have been accusing me of. This is my lockdown beard.
That's okay. I like it. It works for you.
Yeah, it looks a little different than the last time you saw me, though.
Little bit. I think you were still in uniform the last time I saw you, so you were
still
quite,
in uniform.
clean.
Yeah. Also, wasn't quite this silver gray there. That wasn't quite that gray. So, and I had short hair.
It happens.
It does happen. In fact, yeah, there's no way around it. That's right. And my response to you when you asked how I'm doing, I said I'm older. That is the right response, because the only other response is not one you want. So, listen, I really am looking forward to talking to you today. I appreciate you taking time. So we should let people know, if they haven't had a chance to read a little bit about your biography below the video, that you've lived all over Africa. You've been in Gabon, which is an interesting place in and of itself. Love to talk about that. In Central Africa, Senegal, and of course, you and I both worked together at US Africa Command in Germany, which I guess we should say this, not positive or negative, but it was an experience. I mean, it may have been a good or bad experience, but it was an experience. I think it's a good way to describe it.
That's a good way to describe it. I loved it, actually. It was a great learning time for me, and I hope I did something good. But more than anything, I always learn whenever I work someplace in the continent of Africa. And there were many times, many opportunities. So,
well, I would have to say that I definitely think you made a contribution there from my experience. It was the section you worked in was interesting. An eclectic group of people who really contributed to, I mean, I use some Army green speak here, really contributed to the fight, so to speak. You guys made a difference. But you're with the Marine Corps now, and so, I mean, things like that are probably old hat to you now, in the fight sort of thing. You're probably accustomed to that kind of green speak.
Yes, I do have quite a few words they've taught me.
Well, let's not share those. That might not, it's a G-rated audience.
I won't.
Now, you went to an interesting school, one that for your undergraduate that is very well known, has a great reputation. That's James Madison. It's in the southwest corner of Virginia, if I recall correctly, isn't it?
It is. Actually, it's a very picturesque place. When I was there were rolling hills, a railroad track that ran through the campus. Very idyllic, beautiful place in the mountains, lots of sun. It was a lovely campus and a great 4-year experience for me as an undergraduate.
Is it in Charlottesville, or where's it at?
It's in Harrisonburg, Virginia.
Oh, Harrisonburg. That's right, Harrisonburg. Yeah, I senior moment there. I knew it was somewhere like that.
I have many of them, as you will see as we continue to talk. So,
all right, folks. Disclaimer right here on this stream. Though you heard it up front. Okay, so, so you did your undergrad work there. Then you did some grad work at Virginia Polytechnic and State, and then you did your PhD in philosophy and international education policy studies, which is quite an interesting field of study, and that's with the University of Maryland there in College Park.
Yeah.
So. When did you complete that, your PhD?
When?
Mm-hmm.
In 2012. And I have to say, I was very much a working scholar. I finished it while I was actually working at Africa Command. Oh. So if you watch me carefully, you would and see me off in the corner somewhere with this faraway look as I was contemplating the next chapter of my dissertation. So it was very much an engaged experience, not like other folks who did it full time while, sitting in a campus or in a library or at home or wherever, cranking it out. I was actually on the road, traveling quite a bit back and forth, Liberia, Kenya, all the many places that I ended up having to go as I worked. So I was dual-headed, working for Africa Command and working to complete my dissertation. Cute story with that. When I worked at Africa Command, there was a gentleman there, and I can't remember his name, and he addressed everyone by doctor. So in the morning when I would come into the building, climb to the third floor to get to my office, he would say, "Doctor." I don't remember where he got it from. I think he got it from a television show or something.
It's from MASH or something like that. Doctor.
He said, doctor. He said it to everyone. And I used that as my motivation because it was a bit unseemly for him to refer to me as a doctor because I hadn't completed my dissertation. But I can tell you that mind-numbing little morning greeting, doctor, it kind of motivated me to finish. And I remember when I completed my dissertation and I got my credentials and he said, "Doctor." And I said, "Yes, in fact, I am a doctor."
Now it's genuine.
It's real. Thank you. So, he kind of looked startled.
I keep checking into it, but I also did a similar thing. One of my 3 master's programs was I was working on while I was at Africa Command, and so I was doing the same thing you were doing. It's working a day job and trying to complete that stuff. Now, a thesis for a master's isn't quite on the same level as a dissertation, but they're both a lot of work. So I keep asking, and I can't get a single school to go for it, but I keep offering 3 masters for a PhD, and they won't accept it. So I guess I'm going to have to go through the program if I want to do it. I've looked at King's College in the UK and a couple other programs, but I'm not in a rush to get a PhD. So
well, keep it up. You might get an honorary.
Well, that'd be nice. That'd be cool. Yeah, so somebody get an honorary. So, now you've lived in Africa. We've both lived in Africa, and let's see. Is it fair to say we both have a great affection, a great affinity for Africa?
I think it's fair.
Okay. So, what got you interested or to Africa in the first place? I mean, what drove you towards it? For me, it was reading a book. That's what really got me excited about Africa.
I would say that it had a lot to do with just my family. I come from a family that's very open culturally. One of our gateway things has always been food. When I was a little girl, I was introduced to food from all over the world. We had regional dishes that we ate at home. My sister lived in New York, which is, a very diverse place in terms of palate. I was introduced to Indian food and Jamaican food and all types of curries and, lots of different Asian dishes, not just American Chinese food, from a very young age. And I think that curiosity helped plant the seed of openness, at least for me. I know that sounds weird. Food was my gateway to culture.
No, not at all.
But it was.
No, not at all. Food really is. I mean, it really is it's a great icebreaker. It's a great way to break down barriers. It's a great way to draw people in. So no, it doesn't sound weird at all to me.
It was like that. And I remember going off to college and I would meet my friends and they were like, "Yeah, I'm from Pakistan and we're going to have some food." I'm like, "Yeah, I'm over there. I'm there." And so it kind of, I would show up. If you offered food, I'd go. And so eventually when I was in grad school, actually at Virginia Tech, I had a good friend from Nigeria. And she was like, her name was Charlotte. And she had been to the United States and had lived here for many years. And she would invite me over for food. And I would go to her house and eat fufu, which is the pounded yam. I love it.
I don't
and
eat
lots
fufu.
Of spicy things that burned away the lining of my stomach eventually. And then I would go to class and fall asleep for 45 minutes because the fufu was just steamy.
Because you just ate.
Because I ate the fufu, right? So after hearing and working and dealing with Charlotte and others like her, cultural interlocutors, I will call them, I had a very openness to all things Africa. I was really curious. I was really interested. And then after my first master's degree at Virginia Tech, I was working in Fredericksburg, Virginia at Mary Washington College, now Mary Washington University. And a good friend of mine who also lived in the building was from Ethiopia. And she said, the food in Ethiopia, and I was like, yes, right, we're going to have it. And I was like, well, tell me about it. And she tried to prepare it and said she couldn't do it. She didn't have the ingredients. She was like, I'm going to go home. You should come home with me. Mm-hmm. It would be great. And I was like, yes, okay, I will. And I think she thought I was kidding. but I don't really care about those things. And so
don't
I
mess
got
around
on a
with
plane.
food.
I cobbled together some money and I got on a plane. I remember we flew through Saudi Arabia. It was one of my first times flying. And of course, the way I do these things, you know, I didn't look anything up. I was just going to Ethiopia. She told me it was a cool place. I had never been abroad. I got a passport. And I just went to Ethiopia and hung out for the summer. This was in 1994.
Okay.
Which was a very interesting time. I had no idea about politics. I didn't know anything about Ethiopia. I didn't know anything about the Derg. I didn't know anything about their history. All I knew was I was going to hang out. We were going to have parties and we were going to eat lots of food. And that is actually kind of what happened. But in the course of doing that, I learned a lot. When I was over there, I actually worked with my good friend. Those are my dogs, by the way. I have to say that if you can hear them in the background. The rescue dogs don't stop. And they're my coworkers. And so we hung out. I learned a lot. I met her parents. We went on all these trips and travels. Throughout. Yeah, that was me throwing a shoe to get the dogs to be quiet. This is great. And I never stopped after that. I came back. I got really more interested in learning more and understanding a little bit more than what I did. You should have seen me on the plane. This is a great story. I hadn't had real plane food, international food. They smoked on the flight. So I was like dying from the smoke, in the bathroom, playing around with all the soap and things. It was really an interesting moment, and it's absolutely true. But it was a coming, sort of really coming together of lots of different things, a lot of openness. And that sort of started All Things Africa. After that, I was bitten by the bug. I took a position as a teacher in Africa and went to Gabon and lived and worked for a couple of years, spent time in Senegal. And then I started working for the Department of Defense. I started getting degrees and things and studying Francophone Africa. And it just spiraled into more and more experience doing things. I spent a couple of years doing surveys across the continent for Voice of America about their listening habits. And I think that was what made AFRICOM very interested, because I had started doing research and working, and I had also worked at the Africa Center for Strategic Studies, which is very popular on the continent in the security cooperation arena. And all those experiences culminated into me knowing a lot about different things and places and spaces in Africa, having met a lot of people, excuse me, and more than anything, I learned a lot. My way of going to Africa and living was more like a Peace Corps kind of experience. And for those who aren't familiar with the Peace Corps, it's kind of where you go when you're embedded, you live in a town, you're kind of off the grid, you do things like the daily life. And that was my experience. I spent a lot of time in nightclubs and discos, hanging out with friends, having food, going to baptisms and parties and funerals and birthday parties and birth celebrations. And so that was my way of understanding and interacting with the continent, pretty much in places and spaces in the continent, pretty much person to person and very people centric. And that stayed with me. My interest in Africa and the way I see, my lens is a little bit different because I focus on the culture, the habits and of the heart, mind, body, and spirit of the people in the places where I've worked. And I would like to think that kind of sets me apart. And I think that's been very insightful in the work that I did with government, where people tend to be more formal, where they learn and have like a distance between themselves and the people. And mine is completely the other way. It's all about the people. It's all about watching and paying attention, being taken under the wing and learning more than anything. I am not the great knowledge person that can tell anyone. I am not ever going to be or consider myself a subject matter expert or SME in Africa. To me, the SMEs are the people who are there. They're the ones who teach me everything and help me understand as much as I can what's going on. And then I try to use that to connect folks in those places with folks back here in the United States. So there you have it.
Wow. Okay, folks, that was the program. I didn't get a chance to ask any questions as Dr. Briggs just told us everything she was going to share with us in about 15 minutes. I'm just kidding. But seriously, there's a couple good questions come up here. Before I get to them, though, I'm going to say a couple things I got from that. Let's see. Food seems to be very much a recurring theme here in this conversation. You mentioned working for Voice America, the Africa Center, and also you were teaching in Gabon. Those are interesting things. Now, it's interesting that you talk about culture. Maybe that's why we had kind of a professional connection there without even realizing it. Because for me, culture is a big part of it too. In fact, my first master's program was kind of unusual for an Army officer. I was teaching ROTC, and my boss like, you should get a master's degree. I'm like, oh, okay, sure. So I went and worked on a master's in international development studies, and so I used international political economy, I used cultural anthropology, and I use community and regional planning. That's not exactly your average kind of study habits for an Army officer or a military person, but those things for me really came in handy. And then, of course, my love of languages, that all kind of ties together. Now, the one thing where you got me, and I'll be honest here, I'm a picky eater, so I don't eat Ethiopian food. I don't like it all. It looks like brains, man. I'm sorry. And and I never eat fufu. And in Southern Africa, I won't eat pop, which is a similar kind of thing, but it's based on maize instead of yams. But I do love me some jollof rice. Ooh, I do love jollof rice. That's some good stuff. I've had plenty of that over the years. But yeah, so no, I'm a snooty eater, and I'll admit it up front. So I'll just waste away and go hungry if I don't see. By the way, I don't eat goat. Africans have tried to get me. They try to trick me over the years. Oh no, it's chicken. That's not chicken, man. I'm not eating that. I can tell. Chicken don't smell like that. Anyway, but yeah. So
you're missing out. You're missing out.
No, I don't think so. But I will say this is that what's interesting is that your point is very valid in that you got to know the continent by getting to know the people and their ways and what they're all about. For me, I feel the same way. And to me, it's language. So language is part of that too. When you learn another person's language, it really helps get deeper insight into who people are. Where did French come about? Was it because you're in Gabon, or did you already speak it when you went there?
It came from Gabon. I think when I went to Gabon, I knew how to say hors d'oeuvres, bonjour. And that immersion experience, there was at some point I just woke up and I was dreaming in French. And it was interesting with French because I lived in Germany for 6 years and I don't speak German, but I spent a couple of years in Gabon and the French is still with me. In fact, I was talking with my betrothed, I should say. That's a strong word, my boyfriend. And I was speaking to him in English, and I used a French phrasing to say something in English, which is odd. And that still happens to me, even though I don't speak French regularly. It's just in my brain hardwired.
No, absolutely. I get that. Well, the thing about the 6 years living in Germany, but that was when you were at Africa Command, right?
Yes.
Okay, well, it's understandable that you didn't necessarily learn German because you got to make a superhuman effort because you spend 8+ hours a day around Americans speaking English on the internet, on the networks, doing stuff in English, watching American and English news. You really have to make a superhuman effort, and it's hard. By the time you get home, you're knackered. You're ready to kick back, take your shoes off, get something to eat, and lay down maybe. And maybe on the weekends you might get out. So it's really the advantage for me is that I did it when I was 19 years old when I was in Germany, and I was life was brand new, and the world was my oyster, and I wanted to get out, and so that was my first second language was German of the 6 languages that I've got, but that was the first one, and it's not the easiest one for people. So I mean, I can understand why, but I'm with you on the dreaming. I used to dream extensively in German. I dream occasionally in German anymore, but sometimes in French, but not so often because the French isn't quite as deeply embedded as the German is. So it is a weird thing, though. The first time you realize you dream in another language, isn't it? You're like, what the heck?
Yeah, I remember calling, back then we didn't have internet, and I remember calling home and I was having a hard time speaking in English to my sister, and she said, wow, you're really immersed. I don't really understand the words you're saying, because I think what I was doing is syntax wise, I was phrasing as if I was speaking French, but in English. So it sounded kind of choppy and strange. So
yeah. Well, the other thing too is that I'm sure occasionally it happens to you is that you can think of the word in French, you can't think of the word in English, even though you're a native English speaker. That happens to me with German sometimes. Like, oh, of course, Germans just make words up, so it's easier to do in German.
I did notice because in Germany I can order food and ask for things that I want. And I noticed because at AFRICOM I spent a lot of time in countries in Africa and also in French speaking countries, that when I went to order food in French, German things would come out. In particular, there's a certain way you say Coke or Coca-Cola, and I was mixing it up. And of course, everyone corrects you. Right. I think in Germany it's cola.
Yeah, so people just say cola. Yeah,
I know cola light bitter, and in French I think it's coca. Yep, and so exactly. If I say cola in the coca place and Coke in the cola place, each one of them look at me and go, No, that's not it.
Well, they get a kick out of it. So Croy Thompson, who's originally from the Caribbean, has asked. He said, "Chris, why not eat goat? Because I used to be a farmer. They're disgusting. I'm not eating that stuff. It's a miracle that I can even eat poultry after raising chickens. Trust me, you don't want to know, people. Anyway, and then you just don't want to know. And then Ron von Ryman mentioned this because you mentioned Ethiopia. He says, speaking about Ethiopia, said the situation in Tigray doesn't look good at all. No, Tigray that's a real mess. I don't. Are you following that at all, Lisa? What's going on?
I do. I actually teach a class, a regional studies class, where we talk about culture. We actually critique and really talk about culture. And I teach the Horn, or facilitate the Horn of Africa Region 1. And I have been talking about this for a while. Ethiopia has a very interesting culture and history. As the first place that I visited in Africa, I had taken some time and had probably had the longest duration of time to kind of track things and pay attention mildly, not very seriously, but mildly, and learning a lot. And I think it's going to be really interesting to see how things evolve, if they can pull this back, get it together. There are a lot of deep-seated underlying issues, and there are a few articles that I've seen that kind of talk about some of the deeper cultural issues that make this such an important issue and the conflict deep. And part of it has to do with this notion of the change of power that happened when the current prime minister came in to power, and what he represented as a non-Tigray person, and the Tigray's hold on power in Ethiopia for so long. I don't know. I'm looking to see if this destabilizes things, if Ethiopia can pull it back together. And I'm really interested in where the U.S., where we're going to sit in on this issue. We have been a close ally with Ethiopia for a very long time. And I haven't tracked, nor am I following what we're doing and how we're supporting them and what side of this we're coming in on. But I think it's definitely really important. There's so many things going on in Ethiopia right now, apart from the situation with the Tigray and the GERD project, which had some issues with some of the other countries around it. And it'll be interesting to see if they can heal this and sort of move forward.
Well, actually, that's that. When you talk about our relations with Ethiopia, two things that really come to mind. One of late, most recent years, is the security relationship, which is good and bad, good and bad, good and bad. It depends. Now they've changed commanders, but the previous commander, if he didn't want to do something, he simply just shut things down. He was just like that, and that was very difficult for the U.S. Africa Command to deal with.
Yes.
But it's improved a little bit with Abe coming in. Oh, there's one of the rescues. Oh.
Yeah.
But it improved a little bit there. But the other one, of course, you just touched on is the Grand Renaissance Dam, which we found ourselves, at least in this administration, on the side of at least the appearance of being on the side of the Egyptians, which has not made Addis very happy. So that's kind of soured relations a little bit. I'm not really sure it's as simple as that, but in some quarters, that's how people view it. So it's a tough situation. But Tigray is a real mess. The Tigrayans, as you mentioned, they've long, ever since well, before Abiy, all that period of time from the 90s onwards, they were deeply involved. Although a small part of the population, most of the seats of power they had influence or control over. So being on the outs or the margins is not something they were happy with. So that was not a recipe for success, I think. And that's probably what we're seeing play out in some respects in Ethiopia. Mm-hmm. Boy, now well behaved now, sitting on a lap. That's just wanted some attention. Look at that.
Yeah, the other one's I'm petting the other one out of view of the camera. So I do what I have to keep the peace.
Let me get to some of the questions here before we talk more about your experiences here, because there's a lot of good questions coming in, and I'd like to get your take on this. So, and no, not about goat cheese and not about eating goat. We're past that, guys. Okay. So this one's interesting because you work U.S. Marine Corps Intelligence Department headquarters. This was from Felix. Felix said, "What's a day-to-day life in Dr. Briggs? What's your life like working for Marine Corps Intelligence? What are you doing? Are you teaching? Are you doing intelligence analysis? Are you doing things you can't tell people about?"
Well, what I do for the Marine Corps and what I've done for the Department of Defense throughout is research. Basically, I am a researcher. My training and methods are in anthropology, so I look at culture for the Marine Corps, as I did for U.S. Africa Command. And so, depending on what they direct me to look at, I do studies, which involves most of the time surveys or just talking to people. A lot of my research is qualitative to get that deeper dive understanding of things. I spend a lot of time in what we call interviewing, participant observation, and things of that nature, those sort of tools. And then I write reports. I write papers. I talk at conferences and events, which are not classified in any way. And so that's it. I go to a lot of meetings on Zoom now because we're in lockdown, and talk with my colleagues about research, about papers. I write little short pieces that have to do with things that are happening in current events. And depending on the projects I'm directed to work on, based on the Marine Corps' needs. So that's really the long and short of it. It's nothing's really sexy or secret.
Well, no, it's not secret. That's the thing. People who are not inside the intelligence community often think of, ooh, Jason Bourne. Ooh, that's
I wish.
Yeah, that the number of people that do that's really small, and I can neither confirm nor deny whether I've actually ever done that sort of thing. But
it's really hard. I mean, if you look at imaging on television about what happens in these places and spaces that are called intelligence, I think that it definitely creates a picture. I can't really watch them because they don't really mirror anything that has to do remotely with my life or anything that I've done in the intelligence community. I'm just a researcher, so I do some similar things to folks who do research all over the world. And when we come together, we understand that it just depends on the topics and what people ask me to do research on. So, and none of that is very, close held or secret either. So.
Well, absolutely. And the thing about it is that from the early outset of my career as an intelligence officer, I didn't have access to the things that people think that they need. And so I had to rely on open source and research and academic things and media when we still had media before the current generation, when journalists actually did journalism, but, rather than just repeat AP wire reports and things like that. But no, I remember the European came out from Robert Maxwell, and I was tracking what was going on in the former Yugoslavia and telling people about the dangers there. And virtually all the information I knew about was coming from open source and my knowledge of the region, the culture. Exactly. And I was applying all that and doing analysis off of it. And so later people they just assumed that I had access to all these like spies and satellites. I'm like, no, that just kind of fleshes out the picture if you get a little bit more information. If you're good at your craft, then you can get a lot of what you need elsewhere. And that's and so we're talking about what's called open source intelligence, and that's you're working open source intelligence in one respect by doing research and helping out the Marine Corps. That's a fair statement, would you say? Yeah. Okay. Cool.
Yes, it is fair.
Okay, so let me get to the next question here. Let me see. I got it down here, and this one was, So I don't know how familiar you are with Ghana, but Will Woods asked the question. He said, "Who do you think is going to win the election? Is it going to be Nana-Addo, or is it going to be Mahama? And what's the implications for the economy? I don't know. Are you comfortable talking about Ghana, or?"
I don't really follow Ghana. I haven't tracked their elections in a long time. I've been there many times, but usually in the role of security cooperation or hanging out with friends and things like that. So I don't really have a say so in this, Chris. I'm a pass to you then if you do.
Sure. No, I'll just give a quick response on it. I'm not sure who's going to win. It's hard to say with COVID, but regardless who wins, whether the current president or the guy who used to be president, Ghana will be in good hands with either one of these guys in the short term and potentially long term. Since 2000, Ghana has turned the corner. Jerry Rawlings just passed away very recently. I did a video on that just a few weeks back. He is a very complicated person. He'll be remembered positively, but he should also be remembered for the bad things he did as well. But he is ultimately the person that put Ghana on the path to multi-party democracy, representative democracy, and economic development. It wouldn't have happened without Rawlings. So we got to give him credit for that. But he was always the power behind the throne. He was kind of the power broker sitting there in the background. But going forward, Ghana, so for 2 decades now, has been on a good path, representative democracy. They'll continue a good path, but economically they got some problems, and that's mostly because they're getting addicted to debt. And it's easy to get addicted to debt when you've got proven reserves of oil you can rely on. Of course, when the price of oil is $12 a barrel, that's not particularly valuable as opposed to $150 a barrel. So Ghana has been getting itself deeper and deeper into debt. Once again, they had a lot of debt forgiven by the Heavily Indebted Poor Countries Initiative, the HIPC, and Enhanced HIPC, that Ambassador Carter was one of the architects for, former number 2 there at U.S. Africa Command. He was deeply involved in that program. But they got out of the bind, and a lot of money, $3 or $4 billion, something like that, was relieved. Got a clean slate, start all over again. They were doing fine, but they've gotten addicted to debt, and that's a problem. I'm not talking China debt. I'm just talking about debt in general, because some of it's from their own banks, some of it's from international institutions. So that's a problem for them going down the road. Africa across the board, we haven't talked. Maybe we'll talk about this in this show. I'm not sure, but COVID has not been a good thing for Africa economically. It's been a real problem. A lot of the markets for their commodities have dried up, and it's hurt a lot of people. and Africa was on a great path, much of Africa, before COVID hit. And so it's kind of put things in a holding pattern for the short term. Folks, you're listening to Chris White Africa on the Adobe Africa channel on this special feature here on the 1st of December. Where the heck did 2020 go? I feel robbed. Somebody call a cop. I've been cheated out of 2020. My guest today is Dr. Liza Briggs, who's a social scientist. Worked with me. We worked together at US Africa Command, and she's an Africanist. She claims not to be a subject matter expert, but I think she's got some subject matter expertise. She's there with her rescue dogs, and we're just talking about Africa right now. And she works for U.S. Marine Corps now at their Intelligence Department. So let me get back to the next question there, Liza, after Ghana. So that's kind of a response on Ghana. I think Ghana will be okay, but they need to, ease up on the debt. There's a better way to do things. We've talked about Tigray. Oh, here's one. This is from Croy. That's the gentleman who's from the Caribbean originally. He said, what's the current perception of Chinese presence in areas of Africa where both you guys experienced on the ground versus governments? So maybe he wants to know. I would frame it this way. I would reframe it this way, Lisa. In the places you've been on the ground in Africa, what do you think the perception of the Chinese is from people on the ground and then from governments? Because I think they can be very different departures there. Sometimes it's the same, sometimes very different. Any you want to pick a place in particular where you can relate to that story?
I've seen China's presence in places in Africa over many years, over 20 years, more than, since my first time going.
It's probably changed over this time, hasn't it?
It has changed. And I think what's changed more than anything is sort of the notice about what China is doing in Africa. China and Chinese people and businesses have been in Africa since before we started deciding that China was our threat and that we needed to worry about them and be concerned about them as a nation state. When we were focused on other things. I recall working at the Africa Center for Strategic Studies and hearing, ones and twos, people coming in and saying, oh, we got to be worried about China. And this was in 2004-ish. No one wanted to talk about it. It just wasn't in the purview of what folks cared about. It wasn't a priority in the United States. And people were saying, oh, the Chinese should be better worried. They kept briefing it and talking about it. No one was really into it. And the Chinese were there. So that's one piece of it, our sort of, interest in this. And now that it's under the microscope, we're really concerned. The second piece is, and one that I really am interested in and would like to see more done, is really talking about what Africans think about China. And because they're in their sovereign nations, right? And so one of the things that I have as a bit of a problem, and it's not a real problem, it's just one that I'm watching and that I keep my critical lens on, is that who's directing this and who's in charge of what China is doing in Africa. And the truth of it is that the people in the countries are really in charge. And so having a better understanding, which is really difficult to get actually, of what Africans care, how they care, what they think about it, is what's important to me. I'm not sure that we've done enough to dig deeply to understand. A lot of it has become charged with sort of propaganda and our notions and through the lens of how we want to see it. So that, for example, we talk a lot about how Africans are exploited by China and what's happening, the negative impact on the economy due to Chinese imports and goods. And the question is, what does that mean for places and states? Oh, we do features on how, Chinese goods have messed up the marketplace and informal economies in markets in Africa because they're importing goods. They're making fabrics that Africans once made and selling them more cheaply. We talk about those things. And I think the picture is a little more complex than that. And I'm not sure if I have all the information to understand how to make sense of it. To me, the lens is really built on looking at how Africans are victims of the Chinese. And I don't really get a chance to see fully what the gains are. And that, to me, is the answer to the piece about what governments think, because the government has brokered these deals. These people are there, Chinese people are there, and Chinese investment is happening. And what are they getting? I think, at least this is my opinion, that part of it has to do with the overarching power of African pragmatism. And that's something that's not talked about a lot and openly and not really dealt with as a primary rationale for doing business and how you do business and why you do what you do. We need to look at that more closely and cut through our own ideas about what China is doing and why it's bad and how we need to intervene and really understand what the pragmatic approach to it is from the perspective of the African nations that are dealing and doing business with these folks and the everyday people as well. We need to expand our understanding beyond what's bad and look at what they're getting from it and use that as part of how we deal, if you will, with Chinese working and doing and so forth in places in Africa. That's what I have to say on it, but I'm sure you have a point of view as well, Chris.
Yeah, and it's not really all that markedly different, to be honest. It's pretty much along the same lines. Back when you're talking about when you were at the Africa Center, ACSS, Africa Center of Strategic Studies, there, the DoD's think tank on Africa, you were talking about people, were mentioning this, and I think you probably made the point that China didn't just arrive. When the smart people, you know who I'm talking about, in state and DoD, the smart people are started parroting the same lines all the time, you're in trouble. The first one that struck me when I was a foreign area officer is that West Africa will be critical to the U.S. because by 2010, 25% of our petroleum will come from West Africa. I'm like, okay, well, even if that's true, that doesn't necessarily make the assertion true. But that was the first story, and I disagree with that. Turns out it wasn't true. But of course, I couldn't predict, fracking and tight oil and oil shale, and I had no idea that was going to explode. But I just didn't think that it was going to work out. But anyway, so that was the first story. Then the next story around 2008, 9, 10 for sure. China in Africa, China in Africa. Everything was China. And I'm like, okay, hold on, guys. They're not new. They've been here since 1959. The thing that's changed is that with the entry into the World Trade Organization, their economy is blowing up and it's growing fast, and they've got a lot of resources. So the scale of what China is doing in Africa has changed, but the nature of what they're doing hasn't changed in many respects. Now, a lot of smart people, and this is one place where I took a departure with the Trump administration, particularly with Bolton's, and I think it had more to do with Bolton than Trump, is looking at China or looking at Africa, looking at Africa through the lens of competition with China. I think that's the wrong idea. Completely. We're not even competing with the Chinese. We're not even trying. I mean, China's biggest concern, they do have security concerns now, but their biggest concern is economic. And we're almost absent entirely in Africa, other than Caterpillar and Boeing and a few big companies like that. There's only about 30,000 U.S. firms that do any business whatsoever in Africa, and we have like 5 million firms that could be doing business in Africa, and they're not. And we're not even showing up to the game, so we're ceding the playing field to someone else. So if we whine about it in Washington about the Chinese competing, I think we're being a bit disingenuous. So that's kind of where I come from on that. And then the other piece is that we do cooperate with the Chinese in some areas, like in security in Africa, like in Liberia. We cooperate with them extensively. It's people are surprised to hear that. We do compete with them as well, but not particularly economically. We're not really much of a competitor when it comes to that. Now that said, I don't hate China. I don't love China. I see China as a sovereign state in a Westphalian system of states, and they are welcome to their sovereignty, and China acts in its own interest, and they should act in their own interest. The question came up a moment ago there, Lisa, about someone says, what's their end game? Is it economic domination and colonization? I don't think it's either. To me, in my view, for Beijing, for the Chinese Communist Party, Africa is a source of resources. It's a source of dumping their inferior consumer goods, where they can get rid of them, from firms that still aren't up to par. And it's also a future market for their high quality goods, as well as a place to dump their excess capital so they don't have inflation back home, their excess human capital that they can't put to work, like engineers and miners and things like that, can send them to Africa, they can do work there. And it's a place for influence. It used to be also be a place where they wanted African states to recognize one China policy, but I think Malawi is the only country left that doesn't recognize one. So that's pretty much a done deal. They're not worried about that. So it's complicated. It's not a simple thing like the Chinese are evil. Yeah, okay, maybe they are. I'm not going to disagree with that. At least the Chinese Communist Party is evil. But the point is that so I think a lot of what I say kind of tailors or dovetails with what you said there. I don't think there's much space between us. It's not the big threat to Africa. And I like what you said, because people need to be more I think, sophisticated in their analysis of China and Africa and say, well, are Africans getting something? Do they benefit from this? For instance, the China-Africa debt trap. Now, I talk about that, but only in the context of Zambia, Djibouti, and a handful of other places like Angola. Most places where the Chinese are lending money, it's being beneficial to those countries in many respects. So the problem is when you're resource dependent and then you borrow all this money and your resource prices drop, like Angola with oil, Sudan with oil, what are you going to do then? The Chinese are not shy. I don't think the Chinese are going to have a heavily indebted poor countries initiative to relieve debt. If you don't pay the Chinese, they're going to expect that they come repossess your car, your house, your port, and that sort of thing. So that's kind of where I'm at. Does that make sense?
It makes sense. And I agree with you. I think that what you're basically fleshing out is the notion of pragmatism, and that piece that, everything that's happening is in someone's interest. The question is whose interest, and how is that operationalized? Who are the players? If you want to understand that, do that. I think we gloss over it and just sort of good guy, bad guy things, black and white it. And by doing that, we miss opportunities to really understand the evolution of the Chinese presence in Africa and other parts of the world. The other piece I will add to that is that there's a glossing over, or maybe just not a full understanding of how China can relate well. Chinese culture and African cultures can relate because they're all very old.
Yeah.
And as a young nation state, the United States of America, we can't even relate to what that means. When the Chinese and Africans come to the table, they have a whole set of history and understandings that have to do with their oldness as nation states, as people, and as a culture. And I think that that plays into how and why they're able to operate so easily and why they're able to grow and move together, because they've done these types of dances for centuries. Before we were even a nation state. Yeah, and I think that's something to certainly look into. It's a glue. It helps things go well. They can look at each other with a smile and a wink, and they have an understanding that we don't have, really. We just don't, because of the newness of our nation. And we should probably look at that and try to gain that and use that and put that in our toolkit as we try to approach things that have to do with China and China's presence.
I think from a diplomatic standpoint too, having worked in diplomatic circles, there's also there's an angle here that's played less today, but certainly was a big part of Chinese diplomacy, I would say, for about a decade or so. Not that it's disappeared entirely, and it's kind of crass, but it works in many places in sub-Saharan Africa. The Chinese will look to African governments where they're trying to curry favor or build better relations. Go, listen, hey, we're just like you. We're brown too. We were colonized. You know, they colonized us. They took advantage of us. We are simpatico. We are on the same wavelength here. I'm oversimplifying the statement, but I mean, there's a lot of that happens. I've seen the Chinese do it right in front of me. I'm like, dude, I didn't colonize anybody. What the hell are you talking about? But it was effective in some countries in Africa in helping them build relations. I mean, you know, if that's part of the diplomatic game, then good on them. If people want to buy that line, but anyway, so that also takes place too. It's interesting from that standpoint. Let me grab another question here. Iran, where did that come from? So Felix says, what are the principal subjects of research that you carry out for the Marine Corps? So you talked about, you do public perceptions and things like that. I know that there was, were you working with the Afrobarometer and the other surveys that were being done in Africa back when we were at Africa Command? Was that part of the research you were doing? Oh, you weren't. Okay.
And the research that I did in AFRICOM was more original field research, so it was directive. So, for example, I did a look at the perceptions of the armed forces of Liberia. Oh, okay. And my papers that I wrote there are on what's it called? academia.edu. So if you want to read them, they're there. And so that particular one, I went around and I spoke with people in Ethiopia, in Liberia, in all different regions outside of Monrovia about the AFL. I wanted to know what they thought about them, how they thought they were formed. Chris, no one mentioned you. They talked about, no, yeah, you didn't get any mention, which is actually a good thing.
You know, it is good because they shouldn't even know that I existed.
They didn't know you existed. They claimed the entire thing. They were very proud at the time of their forces. They defended them when I criticized or tried to poke holes in the armor of what the AFL was about, what it could be, what the possibilities were. They saw it as a force for good and how it had helped them overcome the many years of civil war that they had. So that's an example of a research project I did. I also did a paper there on security cooperation, comparing US, French, and British, sort of Western power kind of things. And what was interesting about that study is I interviewed people who are from the US, from the UK, as well as French, and many Africans, to kind of look at the perceptions of how we're viewed. That paper is also available to look at. And what I would do with these papers is then brief folks at the Africa Command to help them understand some of the constraints, some of the possibilities with regard to their engagement, and also to sort of hold a mirror up and say, here, this is what folks say about you based on interview with, a couple hundred people, and here's the rich analysis that came out of their conversations about it. So yeah, that's the kind of research that I would do. And I do similar things like that for the Marine Corps, where I go out and talk to Marines about their perceptions of various things and then write papers about them, or a survey. Now with COVID, a lot of that's not happening. Things are on pause because I'm not able to travel. Mm-hmm. But that's the nature of the type of research that I'm doing and have done. Another paper I did as well was on women in African militaries. That one is also available. and where I looked at women in the military in Kenya and also the women in the military in Liberia, and talked about what they thought they needed, what their perceptions of being a woman in the military were, and how they wielded that, and what their needs were, and those sorts of things. Very interesting. And listening to those stories, again, that's what makes me do my work, because it's an honor to be able to hear these really interesting folks talk about why they do what they do, how they got there, and their stories are so beautiful. And life-changing. So that's the nature of the work. Like I said, I feel like a thief. All I do is sit around and suck in all this beautiful stuff, and I write papers and I present it to the folks and help them see things that they're not going to see because they're not going to be on the ground, or not going to take the time to talk to 150 people about a specific thing. So.
Well, absolutely. And of course, for senior leaders, they have so little time that it's quite valuable. So it's critical to have someone that has that insight and that ability to coalesce that data and make the key points. A few points on what you just talked about for Liberia. Number one, if they didn't know who I was outside of Monrovia, then we were incredibly successful. If they bought into this as their, I mean, I'm not saying they weren't hoodwinked. This is their army, but if they bought into it as total ownership of it, that was the intent. But my ego's bruised a little bit. I mean, come on.
Sorry.
But I was there 2 years ago, and I had not been back since I left, and I was there 2 years ago, and I was walking around civilian clothes. I was still in the army, or no, I was not civilian clothes. I was in with fatigues that day, and but when I started walking around at the Barclay Training Center, I kept hearing this check, check, check. I was well known. The soldiers in the Army know me because I used what artillerymen used to make sure that the Liberian soldiers understood. Because Liberian English is not English. It's a pidgin. It's a Creole. And so, for instance, I tell people I haven't done it well on my show, but if you ask where you're from, you might know the answer to this, but most people don't. So if I'd say where are you from, how would you answer that question?
I would say I'm from Virginia.
Okay, and I would be like, you must be very tired. It must have been a long journey. Because where you're from in Liberia doesn't mean where are you from. It means where did you just come from. It's just a simple little thing. But anyway, so yeah, but it was. To make sure the Liberian soldiers understood what I'd say, I'd have them repeat back to me, check if they got it, and then I'd just go question them sometimes. So they called me Check, Colonel Check. So that was so when I was there 2 years ago, I started hearing this check, and I hadn't heard that in like a decade, and all the affection was amazing. It was wonderful. Word spread like wildfire throughout Monrovia. I had people trying to get my scratch card or my SIM card number that I had, the local when I was there, trying to get in touch with me, and people who used to work in the Ministry of Defense, a bunch of soldiers coming up and seeing me, people showing up at my hotel. It was really gratifying. But if they didn't know who I was outside Monrovia, that's great, because that means they've taken ownership of their army, and it means we were successful. And the point I made a moment ago is that you're providing an invaluable service to leaders, because they need those insights, because they're not going to be out on the ground. They're not going to be in Maryland County. They're not going to be in Bonga. They're not going to be in Bong County. They're not going to be out in those places. They're just not going to have a chance to do it. And if they are going to get there, they don't have the background or insight. The few people that have that, there aren't many of those people around, and some of them don't even have it. And then I think the third thing here is that you didn't really touch on this, but it kind of goes in line with this. Is something I criticize our government, and I did it when I was still in uniform, is that I think we are abysmal. It's ironic, because a country that invented Hollywood and the modern film industry and television and telecommunications and invented the modern newspapers and cable news and all these things, we are abysmal at strategic communications. We do a very bad job at telling the world what it is we're doing, what we intend to do, why we did it. And it doesn't matter what the administration is. It's just consistent, in my view, very poorly done. The Chinese are always out there, pumping, beating the drum about what they're doing. And we might go out and cut a ribbon for an HIV clinic, counseling and testing center. And then unless somebody is actually hyperactive and reminds to get the press out there, it won't even be mentioned. But you can be guaranteed that the national television station will be there if the Chinese donate 3 loaves of bread. So I just think we do a bad job of it. And now in this case, I won't say we did a bad job in Liberia, because we want Liberians to own their army. We don't want them to go, well, let's thank Big Brother America for building our army. We want them to know that they played a role in it. So Good stuff there. Now, the women in the military thing, there was a group there when we were at AFRICOM. I was involved in that. I think you were involved in it too. And we met like once a month or something like that, discuss women in the military. It was pretty interesting. That's been a big issue for me over the years. In Liberia, I worked very hard to get women in the military, meeting with women's groups on weekends on my time. Well, I didn't have any time. I worked 7 days a week, but trying to encourage women and girls to come in, getting women on the radio, and then also make sure the press saw. When we had the first truck driving course, 75% of the students were women. But that was because the aptitude score was not particularly high to be a truck driver. That's not an insult. That's just a statement of fact. And most of these girls didn't have an opportunity for a proper education because of the 13-year Civil War. So they're able to take an entrance examination, which determines if men and women, whether they're literate. And that's a West African Education Council examination. And once they're in the military based on their literate, then, but the thing is that most of the girls didn't have particularly good education, so they had low scores. So low score qualifies you for truck driver and a few other things. So 3 out of 4 of the students in the first class are women. The press come out, and I want to make sure they saw that. And they're like, Colonel Wyatt, there's so many women here. I said, well, yeah, they're in the truck. But women don't drive trucks. I said, well, they do in this Army. And and so the women were driving trucks. We got them on the radio station, and they were a big hit. So, and then, of course, I left there, and I went to Botswana, which had just introduced women in the military for the first time ever. They started the military in 78, and it wasn't until 2008 that they finally had women. And it was a bit of a rocky road for them. I worked with Martha McSally, and trying to help get them acclimated to women in the military. A lot of war stories there, but that's an interesting topic. I'm glad that you worked on that. What about Kenya? Can you tell us a little bit about Kenya? Because I've not worked with Kenyan females or the Kenyan military all that much, KDF. What's that like for women in the Kenyan military?
They had a strong tradition, as I recall. I only spoke with them very briefly. It was just a 1-hour interview. It was a very interesting setting because there were a lot of men there as handlers. And the posture was kind of, I don't know. I'm not sure as a field, when you go in the field as a researcher, you experience different things. I was there with a female counterpart, and she was an anthropologist as well. And she's also originally from Ethiopia. She's actually Eritrean, but she grew up in Ethiopia. And so I don't know how we were perceived in our presence as 2 women coming out to talk to the women, but it was a really interesting energy. I remember talking with them, and they were very seasoned, well-trained, disciplined. They had seen a lot and done a lot as a military. I would need to look at the specific field notes to conjure up some of the specific points, because there was just so much data, so many rich points and information. But they had seen a lot. And I believe that in their military, they had a lot of experience, and they had combat experience as well, which was a little different. And they sounded to me like men and people who fought and fight. They were soldiers, and someone who's, like myself, who's worked with people who have been to combat in Afghanistan and Iraq and other places and spaces. There was a seamlessness between the way they spoke about their experiences, how they presented some of the traumas that I saw. Remember, I have a background in psychology, so I see these things and notice these waves and tics and kind of things. And those women to me seemed like others who had fought in the world, men and others. And so that was a really interesting distinction between them and, say, Liberian women who had not really, they had fought, but not really in the same way, not in uniform. So their fights were more personal struggles, battles with the Civil War, the trauma that happened to many of them and people that they know because of the years of Civil War. So trauma, but a different type.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, no, in Liberia during that 13-year Civil War, 3 out of 4 women and girls were raped at least one time. It was absolutely horrific what happened in Liberia. In fact, when I got there, we were very concerned, and the UN AIDS was concerned that HIV might be a serious problem in Liberia because of all the rape and abuse that had gone on during the conflict. They're incredibly fortunate from that standpoint, based on the UN didn't have any good data to go on because, of course, there was no medical facilities. The hospital wasn't really a proper hospital at the time. And they actually UNAIDS wound up using the data from the program that we ran there with DynCorp for all the screening, because we were getting an age cohort that was not the 15 to 49 sexually active cohort you normally use for HIV. By the way, it's World AIDS Day, folks, in case you don't know that.
I did not know that.
Yeah, it's today's, well, it was for the audience, it wasn't for you, but yeah, it's World AIDS Day, and I'll be talking about that later today. So, but they used that data because we had people basically from the age of 18 to 34, something like that, which covers a big section of it. And it was a big cross section of all the different groups in Liberia. And so it was pretty reliable data. And we were finding out that we had well under 1% of HIV positive rate, which turned out to be relatively accurate for the general population in Liberia at the time. It's fascinating. But yeah, you're right. The trauma, just dealing with homes destroyed, hiding, rushing, being hungry, not being able to educate, never know if you're safe or not. And of course, then, gender-based violence as well. The trauma in Liberia was definitely there. You could see it in the faces and in the minds and the reactions of women when you're in Liberia. And I didn't sense it as much, but I wasn't out and about as much on my trip recently because I was just there for a week. But I suspect it's still there. It'll be prevalent. It's lifelong for many folks. But I'm hoping that future generations don't have to experience that and we can get away from that, because it's not a good thing for society when people have to deal with that kind of trauma on a wide scale.
Yeah. And there's some other countries that are not in Africa that have similar things. Palestinians, people that are in conflict, Syria. There, you have a generation of people who are just growing up in trauma and in conflict. And so, yeah, that mark stays there.
Yep, and never mind like the Yazidi, what the horrific things happened to the Yazidis. I mean, if they survive as a people, I'd be astonished. It's absolutely horrific what happened to them, particularly the girls, but not just the girls. But what a horrible thing. Yeah, no, that's so. Someone asked a question about, and I think you already answered this. But they asked a question about. Let me see what the exact question was. This is Felix again. He's got a lot of good questions here. But he said, "What are the principal subjects?" Well, no, I think we've kind of answered this. I think I asked that question already. I'm sorry. I think you had another question here. So this question was about, well, what is the Marine Corps doing with the research you're doing? But you've kind of talked about, you're briefing senior leaders. You're writing research papers, which are available to leaders throughout the Corps. They can use it. And also outside the Marine Corps, I imagine that information is available to other services if they want to reach out and get it. So
it also goes to academic forums. It's not just for the military. It goes out into the world. Having access to people in certain spaces, people in Africa, isn't something just for the military. As academic research goes, it's available to the academic community, which is why the papers are on academia.edu. It's meant for everyone. And at least quite a few of the papers that I've talked about, I get references. People talk about it. They write me and ask follow-on questions. So to me, it's not just for the military. It benefits the broader community. And I would encourage any of you who are interested to go take a look at some of the papers and see if there are any insights that help you. The other thing I think that happens in research, especially when you interview people, is that it helps them get their story out. And when people get a chance to talk, I think it helps the people who tell the story. Even though they're anonymous and I don't share their names and their information, it's transformative for them to be able to share and knowing that someone is going to hear them. And so there's a beautiful part of that I'm glad to be able to be a part of as well.
No, that's absolutely awesome. And you're right. Academia.edu is, I think it's edu. Is it org or edu? I think it's edu.
It's not edu.
Yes, yeah. I get inundated in my Gmail account every day with papers that are coming out there for Africa because I'm subscribed to it. What's nice about it is you don't have to have a subscription to some academic publication and pay hundreds of dollars per year to get access to a lot of articles. So it's a good recommendation. I'm glad you mentioned. I should have mentioned on my program before. I've never done that, and I profit from it every day. I mean, from the standpoint that I get these interesting papers on topics on Africa. Of course, I can't really read all of them. There's so many that come in. But if you look for something specific, it's a good one. Erica says, women soldiers probably have different issues to deal with. Women are natural life bearers and nurturers. That's true, Erica. But also, most societies in Africa are paternalistic, and that's a major issue. We saw that in Botswana when they tried to integrate women. We had a situation, Lisa, where I don't know, I might have told you this, but I'm not sure if I did. But I think I might tell the story. But we had after the women arrived, they're all second lieutenants, so they outrank every enlisted soldier in the force. And out at the Tebe Patswa Air Base, there was a female lieutenant, and a sergeant major walked into her office one day and was talking to her and told her to get him a cup of coffee. And when this story was told, some people in the BDF didn't understand what the issue was. What's the problem? Well, the problem is that she's an officer and he's an NCO, and officers don't fetch water for NCOs. Yes, but she's a woman. No, she's an officer. And then she's a woman. That's that. You respect the rank, and she's filling that position. So, but a lot of people, and the good news is about 80% or more of the soldiers in the BDF, they actually got it. And when we told that story, they're like, they're so embarrassed, like, oh, no. So, what I told Lisa, and you'll appreciate this from a cultural standpoint, most places I've been in Africa, I've been fortunate to deal with professional militaries. Either we were building one in Liberia, which became professional military, or I went and I was able to be around a professional military like the Botswana Defense Force or the Uganda People's Defense Force. And I would talk to soldiers and I would tell them, I said, listen, guys and gals, you and I, we have more in common with each other oftentimes than we have with our own families and where we come from, our own villages. And they're like, what do you mean? I said, no, we're professional military. We have standards, we have a code of conduct, we have expectations, and we have a work ethic. And professional military share that in common. And it's very different than when we go home and take our boots off at night and hang up our jacket. And I said, you have to remember, if you're in the BDF, the Botswana Defense Force, when you come to work, you're a professional soldier. And if there's a female that's in charge, it's a female that's in charge. And if it's a male in charge, it's a male in charge. That's just the way things are. But when you go home at night, you might go home to where you have a paternalistic family organization and you rule the roost. But if you're not the senior officer here, you're not the senior officer here. If it's a woman, you're following her direction. And when you explain it in those contexts, people tend to get it. But and that's a cultural thing. That's a professional military culture. And so I think that was important to share with Africans. And that's one of the great things I loved about being in Africa, is being able to share those moments with Africans. So the places you've been, I'm sorry. Oh, very true. The places you've been, do you have a favorite? Because we're coming up on an hour here and I can't keep you all day. You got a paycheck to earn. So, but is there a favorite place for you in Africa?
I mean, Ethiopia was my first, but I don't really think I have a favorite. I have people that I've met and people I stay in touch with, and that I know and have known for many years in many, many countries. And so I can't say I have a favorite. I just love them all. I love food in all of these places and spaces. And I don't eat goat, but I eat fish and I eat chicken and I eat vegetables, and it all works out really well. I find it a fascinating place. I continue to learn. In anthropology, at least some of us believe that you really can't understand a culture from a visit. It takes years. A culture is like an onion. There's just layers and layers and layers and layers. And I know that in this lifetime, I'll never get to know everything there is about any one country. But sampling and having a chance to go back and to connect with people that I've known and that I know and stay in touch with them, see their families and their children, it's been really rewarding for me. I feel like I didn't just get a career in my work, but I get a gift, and it's wonderful.
Absolutely. I have to concur. It's just been amazing. I've really enjoyed my time in Africa and look forward to future time in Africa. If we can get rid of this silly 72-hour negative test. I can't get a test in 72 hours. So I'm supposed to be in Ghana right now giving a conference.
Okay.
Yeah, no, well, I couldn't even get a test. And then if I got the test, they said the results are 2 to 4 days. I'm like, don't you have rapid tests? Like, no, they're not available here. I'm like, well, then I can't fly because I have to show up and have it within 72 hours. So anyway, hopefully we'll get past that at some point so we can get back on the continent, because I'm definitely missing that part of the adventure of life. So your time with the Marine Corps, are you enjoying it?
Yes. Apart from my work with people in different contexts in Africa, the Marine Corps and its culture is a very interesting place to inhabit. It's partly like on TV, but then it's not. It's a wonderful environment. The Marines definitely have a distinct culture. I say this affectionately and with a joke, that it's one of the last bastions of white male heterosexuality in the world. And I'm not saying that in a negative sense. It's just that so much of that could be unpacked into a book in terms of the ethos and ways of the Marine Corps. It's a very enduring and endearing place to be. So,
well, it's definitely very different than the Army.
It is. It's its own thing in a positive sense, I would say.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. No, I my experience, I enjoy working with all the services except the Navy. All the services. I'm just kidding. I'm just picking on the Navy because it's so easy. It's so easy. They're easy to pick on. But yeah, no, it's fantastic. Well, listen, Liza, it's a pleasure getting a chance to have you come on the program. I want to thank you for your time.
Thank you.
You're most welcome. You're welcome back anytime. We
Sure.
we barely.
Let your folks ask something, and perhaps we can get together and share and chat again.
Yeah, we'll do that. Yeah, it's we barely unpacked a whole lot of stuff we could have talked about here. What you do, I think the work you do is fascinating, and it's pretty cool to see you still helping the Department of Defense, because we need talented people to help people get the insights that they need so they don't do stupid things on the continent. Because it's very easy for generals to do stupid things on the continent. If they just run off,
it is. Anyone to, yes.
They run off half-cocked, thinking they know something, and they don't. So it's good to have folks that can kind of get that azimuth right, so they're going the right direction. So, and of course, in your case, it's coming from talking to Africans and interacting with them, so you really get a good feel for it. Cool beans. Well, is there anything you'd like to close with? Any thoughts here as we enter the holiday season here at the end of the year from hell?
Well, over here it is, but I just want to wish everyone safe time in their space and place. Take care of yourselves. We will get through, and we'll see everybody on the other side, I guess, whatever that means for us in this in the post-COVID environment, or the after the crisis of COVID, because I'm not sure we'll ever get over it. So everyone stay safe and enjoy yourselves. That's about it.
All right. Well, folks, that's Dr. Liza Briggs, currently working with the U.S. Marine Corps. We'll get her back with the Army at some point. Although she wasn't with the Army before, she was at a post that the Army controlled, but she was in a joint assignment, so she wasn't with the Army then. Anyway, but we'll get her back with the Army at some point here. We'll poach her from the Marines. They probably can't afford to pay her enough, so we'll take her back. Marines have a tiny budget, so we'll have to swoop in.
Beans and bullets. They're all about
that's all they got. Beans and bullets and boots. That's it.
I'm an accessory.
Okay, well there you go. All right, so folks, Dr. Lisa Gibbons, or I started to say Gibbons. Lisa Gibbons, like the actress, the presenter. Dr.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
At least you pronounced the name right. That's okay.
Lisa Briggs. Anyway, Dr. Lisa Briggs, thank you very much. I'll let you exit from the stream there, and I'll close out my program here very quickly. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
All right, folks, there you have it. I hope you found that to be an interesting conversation with Dr. Briggs. For me, it was kind of like old home week. We used to work together at U.S. Africa Command. It was a pleasure working with her then. It was great having her as a guest today to talk about Africa in general. This is a different angle, a different view than most people will give you of Africa because of her interaction with Africans directly. And I really want to get around to talk to her about her experiences in Senegal and Gabon. We just touched on that on a future conversation. Perhaps we'll get to that. So I hope that you guys enjoyed it. Felix enjoyed it. It says hoorah, using the Marines vernacular there, hoorah. But thank you very much for that. Anyway, folks, thanks for tuning in. I'll be back for the Stray Voltage Night Owls edition tonight. And we'll be talking about World AIDS Day, among other things today, December 1st, World AIDS Day. This is an annual event that's marked by the UN AIDS program. And see if maybe I dig up a photograph of me at UN AIDS Day celebration, or not celebration, but ceremonies in Niamey, Niger from 2012 in my dress blues. That's kind of cool, and got the little AIDS ribbon on there. But I've worked a lot of HIV programs, so it's a date that I pay attention to each and every year as the world continues to struggle against HIV. It's a pretty nasty virus. We haven't conquered it yet, and it's a challenge for those who contract the virus, unfortunately. Anyway, folks, you may have noticed behind me some changes in the background there, some lights and some green and red lights. And ooh, who's that? Who's that back there? What's that? You guys see him? Yeah, check it out. Look, it's Frosty the Snowman. Merry Christmas, everybody, from Santa himself. Anyway, but I'll see you guys in a couple of hours here on Chris White Africa, about 2 hours and 30 minutes from now at 2:35 Eastern Standard Time, at 21:35, 9:35 in Botswana and in South Africa. Thanks a lot, folks. God bless. Thanks to my special featured guest today, Dr. Liza Briggs. She was fantastic, and I really appreciate her coming on the program. That's it, folks. Going to close out now, and we'll see you for the Night Owls edition later on. Thanks a lot, and God bless.